know. I think this is great. It looks like it maps it out really, really easily.
Well, yeah, it's not ideal yet, but we're getting there. So let's start. So I'll do a very short version first, and then we'll do a longer version. And this normally I prefer a really interactive part, but here we're going to split it into me talking and then we discuss it afterwards, if you don't mind.
Right.
So here we go. All right, so what you see is actually the ABC NLP model. ABC stands for antecedent behavior consequences. It is the core model of applied behavioral analysis, a real science that has been taught within the universities, well, I think almost for 80 years now. So that is well grounded, very well established. NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming. That is way less established as applied behavioral analysis. For the simple reason that it has been pretty much a mess, the world of NLP. Nevertheless, together with the VU University of Amsterdam, I'm developing ABC-NLP, where we combine these two, the ABC model and neuro-linguistic programming. And one of the first things that I had to do, of course, is come up with a scientific theory for NLP. And for that, I also needed to show how it all hangs together. So NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, is often described as this toolbox with all these disconnected tools inside the box. But that's far from reality. That is just an indication that whoever is saying that doesn't know that much about NLP. Because in reality, NLP is a very systematic methodology where everything hangs together, everything is connected. And this is the model that explains it.
Right.
So we're going to have two ways of looking at it. You can either go from the outside in, or you start at the core and then you work your way outwards. The first way, that's actually how most people learn NLP. So when you learn NLP, you start on the rim and then you work your way towards the core. And if you're actually building up NLP as a methodology, you do the opposite way. You start at the core and you work your way to the rim. So I'm going to explain it in the way that most people learn it. That is from the outside to the inside. And the most outer circle that you see actually is not NLP, it's not neuro-linguistic programming, but that is actually the applied behavioral analysis protocol. It has 7 steps. The first step is to specify desired behavior. The second step is to measure desired behavior. The third step is to do an ABC analysis, so you know what kind of consequences are steering this desired behavior, and you can explain with the ABC analysis why you measure what you measured in step 2. Step 4 is feedback, to actually let the people you work with, most of the time, of course, your coachee or the trainees, know what the outcome of the ABC analysis is. Then together you set up sub-goals, so that you have a number of sub-goals that are challenging in one way, but also easily achievable, because whenever a coachee or a trainee actually achieves a sub-goal, that is a reason to celebrate, and then we can shower them in positive consequences, and we know that that means that they're going to do more of it, of the desired behavior, and less of the undesired behavior. Which is step 6, positive reinforcement. I already explained it. That is basically making sure that there are positive consequences for desired behavior, and that positive consequences that used to be in the past for undesired behavior are removed. And then finally, we're going to evaluate and adapt, which basically means we're going to keep on measuring, keep on giving feedback, and making sure that people get all the sub-goals. So that is applied behavioral analysis. And the good thing is that it's completely compatible with neuro-linguistic programming. Neuro-linguistic programming was developed in the 70s as a way to map human behaviors. Now, we just did that with the ABC analysis. It's also mapping human behaviors. And those two methods, and those are completely compatible. So actually, by enclosing all of neuro-linguistic programming with the applied behavior analysis protocol, you immediately make you have a completely scientific way of doing neuro-linguistic programming. Of course, this is only the theory of neuro-linguistic, of the scientific version of this is, I have to say it correctly, this is only the scientific theory of ABC-NLP. The next step, now that we have formulated the whole theory, is to actually go out and check with researchers to see if they also can prove that it works. But given that applied behavior analysis works very well, it's highly likely that NLP, within the framework, enclosed by applied behavior analysis, will also work quite well.
Right.
So that was the outer ring. The next ring are what we call NLP basic presuppositions. These are actually the kinds of things that you get when you understand all of NLP. So again, they enclose all of NLP, which is in the 4 rings that they enclose. And if you understand whatever is in those 4 rings, then those understandings automatically lead you to the conclusions that are the NLP basic presuppositions. To begin with, there's no failure, only feedback. We'll see when I explain the TOTI model. The TOTI thing is what is in the middle. That TOTI works with feedback loops, and as long as you keep on using the feedback loop, there is no failure. Form versus content. And this is where we say that it's much easier to change the way you experience reality than reality itself, and that it is often to do with changing submodalities. Well, you can see submodality as one of the words in the model. So that's linked to that. Solutions come from the past. Again, this links to submodalities, but also to strategies and TOTI model. Because NLP, we go by the idea that at some point in your life you had positive experiences, and if only you could reproduce the code that produced those positive experiences, then you can have those positive experiences now and in the future. And that means that every person carries around his or her own solutions. Then we have meaning is the reaction that you get. So this is again very much the same way that applied behavioral analysis looked at behavior. In this case, verbal behavior. Your verbal behavior is not what you intend it to be, but your verbal behavior actually means how people react to it. If you think you're saying one thing, but people react as if you said something else, then it is much better interpretation than to go with the idea that you said something else, something different than what you intended to say. And this goes to the difference between service and depth structure, and of course communication, all listed in inner circles. Then we have the map is not a territory, but has the similar structure as the territory. This immediately links to the difference between service structure and deep structure, in the sense that the service structure are the maps and the deep structure is the territory. We always address behavior with persons and never the person as a person itself. So we would never say that someone is an idiot. We only say he behaves in an idiotic way. And again, this is very close to how applied behavioral analysis would look at it, because again, we're looking at desired and undesired behaviors. So that is, we're again quite close, which is very naturally because NLP was developed in the 70s in the dying days of behavioral analysis. So a lot of the original ideas of behavior analysis are actually also an influence on NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Behavior as a positive intention, that means that when we do something to achieve something, we do to get positive consequences. And we are not doing stuff to refrain from negative consequences. What actually happens is that when there are negative consequences, we stop acting and we start doing something that does give us positive consequences. So again, this is very much linked to our applied behavioral analysis. And then finally, humans can be best understood in terms of the 5 senses. This goes also to submodalities and the VAKOK acronym, which stands for Visual, Auditory, Kinesthetic, and another two that I can't pronounce because I'm not a native English speaker. But basically what it means is that whatever is of interest to humans can best be expressed in terms of the 5 senses, and we'll see that is the whole strategy of the whole of neurolinguistic programming, to come to so-called NLP strategies in terms of the 5 senses. Well, you can already see the word strategy within the inner circles. So these are the basic NLP presuppositions, and they are conclusions based on your understanding of whatever is enclosed by it. So when we come to the next layer, then you get all these different parts of it. So if we start at the top, then I'll actually skip a layer and you see the word technique standing there. And then you have all these different kinds of techniques. And basically we have timeline techniques, which are part of working with time. That's how our brain processes time in the form of a timeline. You have anchoring techniques, which are basically a kind of save as function, where you can quickly store the code where how meaning is stored in our brain, connected to what we call an anchor, and then fire that anchor off in the different situations, so that the original, most of the time, of course, a very positive code, will be applied to the new situation. Then we have switch techniques. Those techniques are basically how NLP changes the content of people's experience. We already saw that there was a difference between the form of the experience and the content of the experience. Most of the time we work with the form of the experience, and that is what we do with timelines and anchoring and all those techniques. But with switches is a special technique to change the content of people's experience. And all of this is hypnotic in nature, in the sense that we ask people to go inside, look inside of them, check how they feel, of what they visualize, and what kind of inner self-talk they have. But this is also a lot of the hypnosis that is crucial to NLP, because in reality NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, has been made up in order to do hypnosis in secret, of covertly do hypnosis. This was the 70s. Fortunately, in the 90s, science embraced hypnosis. It's now completely scientific, I say, validated. So now we can do it in I say, within the open. Of course, hypnosis is not only a technique, but it's also part of communication. So we have the narrow definition of hypnosis, where people go actually into an hypnotic trance. That is more of an hypnotic technique. And then we have hypnosis in the broad sense, where it is basically getting people to go along with your script. And that is a part of communications. Of course, the most important part of hypnosis, especially in the form of communications, is the Milton model. It's the model of how to influence people through communications. And then we have rapport. Rapport is often misunderstood, but closely related to hypnosis and to the Milton model, in the sense that it is a way to get people to intensely listen to what you say, in both meanings, so both that they hear what you say, but also that they follow your instructions. Then, of course, we have the other way of communicating, which is the meta model, which is communicating to clarify. NLP has a very good way of clarification of how to know when communications are clarifying or not. And these are the 12 rules of the meta model. And whenever you apply them, then you find more detail, or you make sure that details are not distorted or generalized. And in general, it also means that you actually are going to more and more describe what is happening in terms of the 5 senses. And then we have the surface and deep structure that I already talked about. This is basically the understanding that what you're saying, communicating, is different from what you're communicating about. Then we get 4 different things that are slightly linked to goals. So, of course, NLP is very much about how to achieve your goals. But goals have 4 criteria for well-formed outcomes or well-formed goals. And that means that you have to do an ecology check. And we want to make sure that when you change stuff, that it's actually good for people. But not only for themselves, but also for the loved ones, and hopefully also for their friends and families, and maybe colleagues, and maybe society at large, or even the planet. Goals have to be positively stated. That's the positive part, in the sense that you have to describe what you do want rather than what you don't want. You have to be able to achieve them yourself, or be able to help, be able to communicate in such a way that other people are helping you achieving what your goals are. And they have to be stated in, again, there they are again, the 5 senses. They have to be stated in the 5 senses so that you actually know when you achieved your goal, to make sure that you don't run the risk of achieving your goals and then not knowing it, which would be very unhandy. Next is the change model. NLP as a way of how we can move from the current situation to a desired situation, which is basically the same what applied behavioral analysis does, where we move away from undesired behavior towards desired behavior. But unlike applied behavioral analysis, who's mostly working on and focused on external behavior, NLP is much more interested in internal behavior. What do you feel, visualize, and what kind of inner self-talk you have? And we want to make sure that in the desired situation, you actually have good feelings, the right kind of mental imagery, and constructive thinking going on. And then we have chunking. Chunking is a way to actually map out the space that we're going to use as a topic for instance, coaching or training. And access and cues, whenever people do internal behaviors like feeling, visualizations, and inner self-talk, their body tends to move a bit along with what they're doing, and we can pick that up as a hint of what they're doing on the inside. So that's that circle. Then the next circle, now we're getting into much bigger chunks, as it would be called with chunking. So we already discussed about technique. I already discussed about communication. So there are many different NLP techniques. An NLP technique is actually a generalization of a FACOG strategy. That's the next circle. Communications is, of course, a very specific strategy to either how to clarify stuff or how to influence people. Now, we all already discussed goals. There are the submodalities that we talked about. Let me just explain a little bit more about what the submodalities are. So the 5 senses are 5 modalities. These are basically how data comes in to our system through the environment. And when we look at sub-aspects of those modalities, for instance, if you visualize something, you can visualize it in color or in black and white. You can have a still picture of a moving kind of movie, moving pictures, making a movie. Those are all sub-modalities of the visual modality. And then we have finally meta-programs. Meta-programs are brain filters. For instance, they have to do with chunking. That's why there's the link there. And meta-programs are also part of the NLP strategies, because certain strategies require or make it much more easier to run the strategy when you have a meta-program, a brain filter in a certain, way that it is set up. So, for instance, the most famous one is the difference between introvert and extrovert. NLP teaches us that there are no introvert people, there are no extrovert people. There are only certain strategies where introvert behavior is much better, or where extrovert behavior is much better. If you're trying to make a sale and you try to do it while having the brain filter on introvert, that will make it much harder to sell than if you switch it around to extrovert. So that leaves only 2 circles left. I already discussed a lot about NLP strategies. A strategy is basically the NLP way of mapping human behaviors. Applied behavior analysis does it through the ABC model, and NLP strategies do it on their own way by using the 5 senses and submodalities and meta-programs. And actually what I did with an ABC NLP is combine both of them by having basically a NLP strategy as is, but then we add what are the consequences of that behavior, what are the positive consequences, what are the negative consequences, to make it in line or in with applied behavioral analysis. And I already discussed the FACOG acronym, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, Olgarvery and gustafactory from my top of my mind. And those are the 5 senses that they have seen NLP works almost continuously with. And then finally, we have the TOTI model, which is also a scientific model. It is created in 1960 by a psychologist called Miller. And this is a cybernetic model to explain how systems, including computer systems, but also humans, achieve their goals by basically doing the following cybernetic loop. 1 is activate a goal. 2, select an action to achieve your goal. 3, do the action. 4, interpret the result of your action. 5, compare your interpretation with your goal. And 6, have a feedback loop where if you have achieved your goal, great, go back to step 1 and activate a different goal. And if you have not achieved your goal, then we go back to step 2. We select preferably a different action, so we can change our behavior and see if different behavior gets us to our goal. If there's still enough time, and if we run out of time, then we're going to back to step 1, activate a different goal, but that different goal would most probably be escalate the matter to a higher authority in the hope that they can help us. If you listen, and the TOTI model is the basic building block of everything that NLP does, because it's the basic building block of every NLP strategy. And every NLP strategy, again, is used to map every human behavior. So everything you do with neuro-linguistic programming is, in fact, a NLP strategy. And an NLP strategy is, in fact, built up from the TOTI model. And hence, everything we do in NLP is built up out of TOTI model building blocks. And interesting enough, if you listen closely to what I said about the cybernetic loop of activating a goal, selecting an action, doing the action, interpreting the result, comparing the result with the goal, and have a feedback loop to make sure that you achieve your goal either directly or a bit later, that pretty much sound the same as the whole applied behavioral analysis protocol, where we said, okay, we're going to specify desired behavior. Oh, but that sounds like activating a goal. We're going to measure it. That sounds like what in the cybernetic loop is interpreting the result. Then we're going to do an ABC analysis to actually see what the reasons are that a certain measurement or interpretation came out of the whole activity. Then we use feedback, goals, and positive reinforcement to steer the behavior towards achieving the goal. And again, evaluate and adapt is pretty much the same as feedback. So you can hear that the TOTI model and the applied behavioral analysis protocol are pretty much in line together, hence the easy way to combine it, both of them into ABC-NLP, applied behavioral analysis plus neuro-linguistic programming.